Hi everyone, I am Neel and today I'm going to talk about our work on Delegated Pandora's box. This is a joint work with my advisor Shaddin and Curtis. So in this work, we look at principal agent problem where principal looks to solve some optimization problem under uncertainty. And as a part of that optimization problem, the principal requires to collect some data, which we also refer as probing. And this probing incurs some known cost, which we can also thought of as the price for the information. However, for some reason, the principal do not have enough expertise or time, and that's why they delegates this probing to an expert agent. However, the agent might have the different objective function that they want to maximize, and therefore, they probe the elements and solves this optimization problem that maximizes their objective. So the question that we ask in this work is, how can the principal incentivize the agent to maximize this principal's utility? So I'll start again. So let me motivate this abstract model that I described using this simple example. So there is a firm who wants to hire a bunch of candidates subject to a packing constraint. Okay? And for example, like the firm wants to hire, say, at most 5 candidates out of pool of candidates. Right? Due to some reason, this firm does not have enough resources or expertise, and that's why they delegate this hiring process to some recruitment agency. Right? And now, each candidate has a reward for both the firm and agency that comes from a known distribution. Okay? And these rewards are independent across the elements. Now, in order to know the actual worth of candidates, the candidates needs to be interviewed. In other words, they need to be probed, and that will give their actual realization. And this interviews incurs some known cost. So once this firm delegates this hiring process to an agency runs this process maximizing their own utility. Like they will go and interview some subset of candidates, and they'll select the candidates, a set of candidates that maximizes the agency's objective function. Okay? And they will propose this solution to the firm, like these are the set of candidates I picked for you. And this is the basic outline of our delegation model. So before we talk about delegation, let's first understand what is the principal's objective function, like more formally, or like the principal's optimization problem. Okay? So there are a finite set of elements, and principal wants to select subset of elements subject to some downward closed family of constraints that we also refer as packing constraints. For example, they want to select at most 5 elements. Okay? And the principal has stochastic value for each element that is drawn from some known distribution. Right? And the realization for each element can be known by probing them. Right? And this probing incurs some cost, that is like the cost you pay for the information. Now, given this setup, principal wants to adaptively probe some set of elements and select a feasible set of elements from the probed elements such that it maximizes principal's total value of selected elements minus the cost they paid for the probed elements. So in our running example, suppose there are 5 candidates and principal wants to hire 1 candidate. Then the principal wants to interview and knows the realization of these candidates adaptively and pick the best candidate out of that, the interviewed candidate that maximizes their total value minus cost. And this problem is also known as this generalized Pandora's box problem, which is the generalization of classic Weismann's Pandora's box. So in delegation setting, the principal does not have enough expertise to solve this Pandora's box problem, and they delegates this problem to the agent to collect the data, like to run the probing. And now each element has a stochastic reward for both principal and the agent that comes from the known distribution. So here note that this value for principal and agent for fixed element can be arbitrarily correlated, but they are independent across the elements. Now the agent strategically probes subset of elements, and whatever they observe, depending on that, this sends a signal to the principal. Okay. Now the signal can be like the agent suggests some solution that is favorable to them, but it might not be too favorable to, and might not be too unfavorable to the principal. Right? And given this signal, principal either selects this set of elements or they rejects or quits, and the both end up getting zero utility. Okay. So let me first outline some delegation assumptions, like the modeling assumptions, which are fairly standard in the delegation setting. So, and it will also help to distinguish between the hidden action model between principal and agent. So in this model, the principal observes the utility of, or the realization of the elements that they end up selecting, right? In other words, the agent's signal contains verifiable information because the principal observes the realization of the elements they end up selecting, right? And that means that agent cannot lie about the signal that they propose to the principal, but they can omit information about the signal or the solution that they don't end up proposing. Okay? Right. So, and also we assume independence across the elements. Okay. So the question that we ask in this work is, can principal incentivize the agent to probe and select the set of elements that approximates their undelegated utility? So if principal had enough resources to or expertise to run this optimization problem on their own, how much they can obtain, like how much optimal utility that they can obtain. Right? And we measure this by delegation gap, which essentially means that, which is essentially the worst case ratio of principal's delegated utility versus the optimal undelegated utility. That means how much principal basically loses by delegating this problem to an agent. In fact, the worst case agent. So let me first give out some related work. So this delegation problem started in like late 70s in econ literature by Holmstrom's PhD thesis. But most of the work in econ focuses on characterizing this optimal mechanism. Okay? So in the recent work, like in 2018, Kleinberg and Kleinberg studies the variants of this delegated stochastic packing problem, like the stochastic search problem, for rank 1 matoid constraint. That means the principal only wants to select one element out of n. And they have a result where they show that if there are no cost for probing, then they can reduce this problem to single choice profit inequality. And when there are, they also show that when there are probing costs, they can again reduce the problem to a single choice profit inequality, but when the reward distributions are binary. Okay? In recent work, in Bechtel and Dughmi's recent work in 2021, they studies this problem for more general combinatorial packing constraints, and they again assume there is no probing cost. And they reduces this delegation problem to combinatorial profit inequalities. Right? And both this work focuses on designing delegation mechanism without any monetary transfer. Okay. So in this work, we also focus on designing delegation mechanism without any money transfer. And due to the beautiful result from Kleinberg and Kleinberg's work, we can restrict our focus on simple class of mechanism named single proposal mechanisms. So it's very simple class of mechanism that I'll just describe now. So in the single proposal mechanism, principal designs menu of valuated solutions which they want to accept. Right? And this valuated solution is basically a set of feasible elements, and each element is tagged with some acceptable outcome. So for example, if principal wants to select at most 2 elements, then in this example, the valuated solution can be principal is willing to accept element 1 and 4, as long as the realization of 1 is greater than or equal to 2, and the realization of 4 is greater than or equal to 1. Now, given this menu, agent probes some subset of elements and sends a signal or the proposes solution from which is valid given this menu and agrees with whatever they probed, because as we earlier mentioned that agent cannot lie. Okay. Right. So in this work, like the main distinguish from the previous work is we have this probing cost, and that makes this problem slightly more complicated. So let me demonstrate that. So underlying principles optimization problem is Pandora's box. And the algorithm that solves this Pandora's box typically splits each element's distribution into two parts, like the head of the distribution and the tail of the distribution, using some threshold. Okay? And this threshold is computed in a way that the tail of the distribution essentially covers the cost that goes for the probing, and the head of the distribution is essentially the bonus or the net utility you get after paying the probing cost. Okay? And these algorithms are non-exposed in the sense that if an element E is probed and the realization is in the tail, then the element is always selected, right? But when the agent when the principal delegates this problem to an agent, this might not hold all the time. So suppose agent probes an element E and observes that the principal's value is in the tail, right? But they might skip this element in favor of some other elements whose value for the agent is more likely to be higher. And that's why this becomes exposed. And this might lead to like a bad utility for the principal. And in fact, we formalize this intuition and show that, show an impossibility result, which essentially shows that for the standard model considered in Kleinberg's and Kleinberg work, in which the principal and agent pays the fixed percentage of costs, we show that the no delegation mechanism can obtain a constant approximation even for the simplest of constraints like rank 1 Metoid constraints, and even when the cost for each items are discounted by a constant factor. Okay? So let me remind you that the Kleinberg's and Kleinberg provides a positive result when the reward distributions are binary. But here we show that beyond binary distribution, we can't hope for anything non-trivial. So the next natural question is who should pay the cost, right? So in this work, we propose two models. The first, where the first model is free agent, where basically principal pays the entire cost, where the agent just provides their expertise and invests their time. And in the second model, we propose a custom cost where principal chooses as part of the strategy how the individual costs are shared. And here the principal is clearly slightly more powerful. So for the free agent model, where principal pays the entire cost, we show that for nice enough packing constraints, the delegation gap is constant when the costs are discounted by a constant factor. Okay? So this nice enough constraints require to have a strong online contention resolution schemes that I'll explain in some time. So more formally, our result is if we have alpha online contention resolution schemes, then we have alpha comma alpha delegation. That means if the costs are discounted by alpha factor, then we get alpha approximation of the principal's problem by delegating. And such contention resolutions are known to exist for broad class of packing constraints. Okay? So let me, and this is a bi-criteria approximation. However, you can think of these discounts as the advantage of delegating because the agent has more expertise in this field, so they might reduce some probing cost due to that. Okay? So let me convince you that we can reduce this delegation problem to online contention resolution. And first, let me define what strong alpha OCRS means. Okay? So I'm going to digress a little. So suppose each element is active with probability P independently, and this probability vector is in some constraint polytope. Okay? Now the adversary, there is an adversary who sends these elements in online fashion to a gambler and reveals their status, like either the element is active or not. Okay? And this adversary is super powerful. The adversary knows everything and can pick the worst case order. what alpha OCRS implies is that the probability, it provides a strategy for the gambler that the probability of element E being selected, given the element E is available, is greater than or equal to alpha against such strong adversary. Okay. So yeah, let's go back to delegation in the model where agent pays no cost, right? So as agent pays no cost, they're gonna probe all the elements. So they're gonna know the realization of all the elements, right? So the agent will basically act as an adversary in this case, okay? So for now, for each element, focus on the head of its reward distribution and forget about the tail, right? So we cut the distribution from the head, and let's remove the tail for now, okay? And let's define this PE, which is the probability that element E is in the optimal solution that comes from this head of the distribution, okay? Now we define these thresholds that guarantees that the probability that E, the realization of E exceeds this threshold, the reward of E exceeds this threshold with probability P. And now we go back to this OCRS setting. Okay, now we define that each element is active whenever its realization exceeds this threshold. Okay, so now the OCRS basically helps to design a menu for the principal, which basically forces the worst case agent to act no worse than this worst case adversary in this OCRS setting. So that implies that this agent, this worst case agent, selects an element E with probability at least alpha times PE. Probability alpha times PE. And that ensures that we get alpha fraction of this head of the distribution. Okay? And using the similar argument, we can also show that this gets alpha fraction of the tail of the distribution as well. And combining the discount with this alpha fraction, we basically get our desired result. Okay? On the other hand, for the custom cost model, when principal as a part of the strategy decides how the costs are shared, we have more stronger delegation. So for a nice enough packing constraint, we show that delegation gap is constant. And again, it requires strong OCRS schemes for the underlying constraints. And a result is if we have alpha OCRS, then we can have alpha over 2 approximation. And again, this exists for broad class of constraint. The proof is similar to the, yeah, I'll just finish in 10 seconds. So the proof is similar to the free agent case, but here principal has more power, and that's why they can do like slightly more complicated things and control agent's behavior. So I'm gonna skip this, and yeah, I think that's all.
Great.
Yeah.
Let's thank Neel. All right, we have time for a quick question while the next speaker starts getting set up. Anyone in the...
So Sam, there's a question from the virtual audience. Yinka is coming in.
Yeah, go for it.
Hi, I just want to ask that you have an approximation result for the general cases. I wonder if it's due to the fact that it's just because the benchmark of offline Pandora bug is just too high. Is it possible, like in the general case, to design mechanism to approximate the second best? That is the optimal you can do on the third delegation setting.
So what do you mean by the second best?
So just design a mechanism that approximates whatever the best you can do under the delegation setting.
Yes.
Like, is that possible?
So you are saying that is it possible to design approximation of the best delegation best delegation mechanism? Am I right?
Yes.
Yes, that might be possible, but that's not what we focus on this work. We try to compare like how much you lose by delegation. Like if you delegate this problem, how much you lose because you delegated the search problem.
Yeah, I see. Okay, thank you.
But yeah, it might be possible.
Let's thank Neel one more time.